Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Berdinsky, and somewhere on that split screen, sharing it with me is Alida Cella, chair of the Democratic Town Committee. Alida, welcome back to Citizen Mike Show. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and we got a lot to talk about. Obviously, this is the election special, and we got three levels of elections, the local, the state, and the national. This episode is being produced on Sunday night, the 13th of November at about 7:15, and the national picture could change. As soon as we get off this production, it could change. So with that in mind, I want to start with the local election because that's, where you come in, the head of the Democratic Town Committee. You got your thumb on the pulse of what was going on in those campaigns. But I want to open with some numbers. Locally, Craig Fishbein won his election 56 to 44% over Rebecca, and Mary Mashinsky won her election 55% to 44% over Carrie Lentz. And the probate judge election, Patrick Burney won his election 52% over Nicole Barillaro. So let's go back a little bit and take these elections one at a time.
Yeah.
And let me get your thoughts on, the nature of the campaign, why it happened, just whatever your commentary is, see where it goes. Let's start with Mary Mashinsky and Carrie Lentz.
Yeah.
Why did it end up that way? What's your thoughts on that election?
Well, my thoughts on that are that Mary is a very popular state rep. I mean, she has done a tremendous amount for Wallingford. She is extremely responsive. She doesn't care what party you are. If you call her and ask her for help, she is going to answer the phone and she is going to do everything she can for you. Right? She's just that kind of wonderful person. In addition, the Wallingford Linear Trail, they should call it the Mary Mashinsky Trail. Right? She has done all the work to get all those grants and sat on all those committees to make that happen. Like, that's just the tip of the iceberg for what Mary is willing to do to make things happen. She has also lowered taxes on seniors, nearly eliminated the income tax, as far as I understand, to try to make Connecticut more affordable. She has voted on legislation to lower taxes, the gas tax. She has worked diligently to try to figure out how to make the catalytic car converter thefts less profitable, to reduce the crime rates on those. She's everywhere all the time, working so hard to fix the problems that we're experiencing. And I think voters, for the most part, know that about Mary because they've had a lot of experience, exposure to her, because every event I ever go to, there's Mary. She is just there always for us. So that's what I attribute to Mary's success in her district. And then I also think it tends to be a more Democratic leaning district area. So all of those statewide races and also went for Democrats, so that's part of it.
And you have the power of incumbency and the name recognition.
Correct.
And all those things that play into that.
Right.
And I guess she's one of the longest serving state reps in the state. I'm not sure the number, but I mean, she's up there.
Another thing to point out is in the 85th, if Nicole Barillaro was just running in the 85th, Nicole would have won.
Yeah.
Right. So
if Nicole was running just in the 85th, is what you're saying. Yeah. Just walk me through that. Why did you say that?
Say that
I didn't look at the numbers. I didn't look at the numbers like you did, so it's a real question. I don't know.
Yes. So if you just pull the votes from the 85th district, which covers District 2, District 3, District 4, District 5, and just look at those voters, all the Democrats won: the governor, the senator, third Congress, so Richard Blumenthal, Rosa DeLauro, Ciccarella won, but again, he was running against a third party Green candidate in a Senate district, which it's extremely difficult. But anyway, that was the only Republican to win. But Stephanie Thomas, Russell, across the board, Scanlon, Tong, Nicole Barillero, and Robert Avery, right? Even the registrar won in that district. So that's very telling about how democratic those sections of town are. And then if you look to compare to the 90th, which Fishbein has recreated for himself, and we just look at Wallingford numbers, I didn't pull the Middlefield numbers. Again, the complete opposite. All the Republicans won in every single one of those categories, except for William Tong, which is very interesting.
Right.
And the ballot question actually was very strongly voted in favor for, even in the 90th, which I thought was also interesting.
So I want to go back first to Mary Mashinsky's district. I think what you said was that Nicole Barillero got more votes than Patrick Burney in that district. Is that
in the 85th?
In the 85th. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move to the 90th district. Rebecca Hyland in that district got 44%. Craig Fishbein got 56%. That 56% was the strongest Republican vote of the three contests we're going to be talking about. And you had an explanation. Walk me through the explanation for that, and I'm going to take it from there. Go ahead.
Yeah, to me, it's a no-brainer, right? How do you go from the last election only winning by 7 votes to winning the next election by 56%, you said? I mean, that's pulling a rabbit out of your hat. Well, he got lucky. It was 2020 and we had the census, and then he had this opportunity to redistrict the 90th. He no longer has that swath of Cheshire where Jim Jinks was his opponent. So he got to eliminate his opponent and eliminate that whole progressive part of Cheshire. And then he picked up another conservative district in Wallingford, District 1. And he figured Middlefield would be more conservative than what Cheshire was. And he picked up all of Middlefield. And he was right. He surgically cut out in Wallingford, any Democrats that he thought could run against him. He didn't count on Rebecca Hyland, living somewhere in District 7. And, he very clever, bravo to him. He redistricted himself and found voters that would vote for him and succeeded. I don't see that as Fishbein winning, as he played the game.
So I want to put a little different perspective on it and see if you agree. This is, I think, a function of, Connecticut's iteration of gerrymandering.
Oh, yeah.
Redistricting. It's not as extreme in some states, but there is such a thing. The conventional wisdom, as I understand it, is that redistricting is done at the state level by a committee. If the legislature can't agree or they have trouble, it goes to a commission. The commission is bipartisan. I'm not saying equally, but it's bipartisan.
Sure. Democratic. At this point, it's Democratic majority.
Yeah,
so it would be a Democratic one, right? Yeah, no.
And then let me just finish my thought, because I'm getting to the punchline. I'm not quite there yet.
All right.
And that again, the conventional wisdom is that this commission protects incumbents, Republican or Democrat, so that Craig Fishbein, being a Republican, being somewhat of a leader in the Republican caucus, Republican Party, they protected him. But can't you say the same thing about Liz Lenahan? I mean, didn't they protect her by giving her part of Hampden, more progressive, taking away some of the redder parts of Cheshire? So doesn't it kind of work both ways? Or does it? I don't know.
I will not mince words. Gerrymandering is wrong. Gerrymandering is basically taking away the will of the voter and putting the power in the hands of the politicians. And I think it is one of the things that is killing our democracy. It's not right in Connecticut. It's not right in any state. It's not right when Democrats do it, and it's
Yeah.
not right when Republicans do it.
Well,
And so, yeah, I agree. I do think that there was some monkeying to try to help our incumbents do a little better. And in order to gain that, whatever the Republicans wanted to do to protect Fishbein, God knows why, he doesn't vote with his party. I mean, we were trying to point out all these bipartisan votes where he voted no. But for some reason, they seem to want to keep him around, and they were willing to gerrymander it to such a degree that he went from only winning by 7 to getting 58% or 56% of the vote, whatever it was. Just
so if I'm right about this deal that the Republicans and the Democrats have struck at the state level, and if you try to find a witness to the deal or an affidavit or testimony, you're probably not going to find it because, oh no, it's really not a deal. But I'm putting that forward, I guess, as an allegation
oh
that
no,
needs to be
it was a deal.
proven. But
Yeah, and they'll even say it. That's what I was told flat out by Matt Ritter, is that
yeah,
it was a deal, and that's what they did. They sacrificed Wallingford, which
it's an understanding. It's an understanding.
we were going to lose leadership in the DTC because people were so upset about it. I
Yeah.
mean, we felt abandoned after we had done all that work to build up to be at a point where we were going to be able to get this guy out, and then they just cut our legs out from under
Yeah.
and I felt this way about gerrymandering before that happened to us. I can write a book about the 3 things that are wrong with our democracy, and one of those 3 things is gerrymandering.
The reason why I make such a point of this is that the way you initially described it is like Craig was personally responsible, unilaterally, on his own, single-handedly.
In
But
Wallingford,
it's a broader problem.
well, he was offered that opportunity, and he was very much instrumental in doing it. He was who gerrymandered Wallingford. I mean, he was the person who was taking the helm and making that happen. Yes, so he was handed that opportunity, and he took full advantage of it.
Still confused. Did he have a personal hand in this? And if so, why do you say that?
Because I think when the deal was made, he was consulted, and he
Okay.
made sure to work it to his best advantage.
Okay. All right. And probably then, as was Liz Linehan and the state reps all across the state.
Yeah, interestingly enough, when I asked like Mary about it, Mary didn't have as much involvement in it. But my understanding from even the town hall is that Craig was redistricting 1, 2, 7, 8, and 9. He was actually formulating what was happening on that town council level. And possibly because of his dual role as town councilor and as state rep, that he took advantage of that and worked it very much in his favor.
Let's switch over to the Bernie Barilaro vote. What about that campaign and the vote total, and just how do you explain the result there?
So that one stings, you know. I do think there is a degree of Bernie has a lot of in-town connections because of his role on the Masonic board and because of his role on the Wallingford Electric Division, and the numbers of years he's been involved in those types of boards and commissions. So that most certainly helped him. Straight up on candidate qualification, Nicole is the better candidate still. I mean, you have somebody who is a bankruptcy lawyer being a probate judge and really has no business doing that, in my opinion, as well as this huge conflict of interest being on the Masonic board. I mean, I know he's going to say he's stepping aside, but I was talking to Judge Wright about this, and a full third of the cases that Bernie's going to be seeing come from Masonic home, come from residents who are there. Some of these are cases that need to be decided quite quickly. And he's going to have to say, hey, I have a relationship with Masonic, whether he's on the board or not. He's got to declare that for the next, I don't know, for the rest of his career. And then every time that happens, the defendant gets a opportunity, or the party gets gets an opportunity for 3 days, whether they want to have the judge recuse himself. And that throws a whole monkey wrench into the case, because if they're trying to say, let's say, commit somebody and they have to do it within a certain amount of time, then that person disappears. It's a problem. It's a problem. So, you know, I don't think that message got out far enough and wide enough and fast enough that this is not the right candidate for this position, and his connections in town is what carried him.
Let's talk about the connections in town, and we're going to come back to the Bernie Barolero and apply that. One of the things I wanted to talk about on the Wallingford level, the town of Wallingford level, is why do winners win? Let's say for town council, for mayor, and in this case, the probate judge. And just as an opener, I'll throw this out. Well, they win because of name recognition. They win because of the length of their Christmas card list. They win because they have a base, whether it's they went to Lyman Hall and they know the entire class, whether they have a big church behind them or a civic organization behind them, whether they've spent enough time around town in various civic positions that, again, they have this name recognition, and that's, over and above policy, that probably drives the result. And as we're talking about in 5 minutes, it doesn't hurt if you're a Republican in Wallingford. It just doesn't hurt. It helps immensely. So would you generally agree with my assessment about why winners win in Wallingford?
Sure. I would say yes, and then I would add, but I think I see the work ahead of us, and I don't see that as insurmountable, right? If we look at Wallingford as a whole, when you have, Lamont winning and Blumenthal winning and Rosa DeLauro winning, we clearly have enough people who feel align with those values. And for some reason, right, you're saying the closer I know that person, so I'm voting for that person, sort of overcomes that maybe political divide. But there is a contingent of people who are crossing that Republican vote, splitting their ticket, at least on the statewide races. And I think there is plenty of room for us to build as Democrats in Wallingford. I think that we only just started this work. This is my second term, 2 years ago, and or 4 years ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago. I can't remember anymore how long it's been, but we've only just begun, and we've made huge strides. I think I pointed out before, we gained over 1,200 voters, Democratic voters, in my first 2 years. And we're just continuing to grow. So I don't see that as insurmountable or as something that will.
Well, I want to get back to the larger point. When I look at the Fishbein Rebecca Highland contest, the Mary Mashinsky Carrie Lentz, and the Pat Burney Nicole Barolero contest, what I see is 3 winners who came into the election with a lot of name recognition and a large Christmas card list and a large base. So, if you don't know much about the policies, let's say, of Craig Fishbein or Rebecca Highland, and a lot of local voters just do not have the time to independently research their record, their policies, and sort of dissect that, most voters go with the name they know.
Sure.
It's just a fact of life. I mean, it just is a fact of life. So it would take, I posit, a Herculean effort in Wallingford to sort of overcome that. In Rebecca Highland's case, my impression is she didn't come in with a lot of name recognition. I'm not talking qualifications here.
Right.
I'm not talking policies. I'm not taking voting track record.
Sure.
A lot of people just didn't know her. And so we're expecting voters that have a habit, let's say, of voting for Fishbein, suddenly to change horses on the basis of very little knowledge of Rebecca Highland. Same thing goes with Carrie Lentz. So, it becomes a problem for challengers with coming out of left field, so to speak. You said something about the Patrick Burney and Nicole Barolero contest, and about the conflict of interest and
Yeah,
I want to put a competing concept up there to provoke thought, and that's about it, really.
sure.
Um, I read in the paper that Patrick is going to resign from the board he's on
Hmm.
at
Masonic.
Sonic, and he's going to get himself off of the Public Utilities Commission. And can a case be made that as soon as he gets off the board of Masonic, the conflict of interest disappears?
No,
Tell me.
because he still has to declare that he had been on those boards.
Well,
So,
he would declare that as in a contested hearing. Not all hearings are contested. And then I guess it'd be up to someone to make a stink about it. Is that
my understanding in any proceeding where there's an association or a prior association with those organizations, he has to declare that he had been part of those associations, and he has to do that for the rest of his judgeship.
all right?
Judge Wright was telling me how he had worked for a law firm before he became judge, and anytime that law firm, even though he didn't know the lawyers there anymore, you still have to declare that, and it still puts a hold on the proceedings that are going to be before you, because they have to have 3 days to be able to respond to that. So it's a problem. It's a problem, and especially for cases that are probate, where Masonic is such a huge percentage of those cases that's coming before him all the time. That's a drag on the system. If he's going to have to recuse himself from a third of the cases, or from a certain portion of cases in the cases, it's a problem. It's a problem.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to have to recuse himself from a third of the cases. Again, if it's a contested matter and someone objects, we'll see how that goes. But why then didn't the Barilaro campaign or the surrogates or a PAC or something
Right.
more of a stink about it?
We Nicole Barilaro, as for her position, can't say anything negative about another candidate. And then for us, I had that understanding, but I don't have a good answer. It came up in the we had given it to the Record Journal to do, and we had thought that was going to come out much sooner and going to be a much bigger story. And then we were very disappointed that it came out so late in the campaign and was not a bigger story. So yes, I think if I could do it over again, I would have brought it up 3 months earlier and hammered it home a lot sooner. But we were working on that strategy, and that didn't come out the way I had hoped it would.
Let's change the subject. I mentioned a couple times, or suggested a couple times, that if you're a Republican running in Wallingford, that's pretty good context. It's a pretty good backdrop to be a Republican in Wallingford and running for local office. Given just the history of the elections and the numbers of the votes. This year in 2022, we got some current numbers that sort of illustrate the point. So let me share that with our viewers. First, taking Ned Lamont. Statewide, he got, I'm rounding this, 56% of the vote. But in Wallingford, he only got 50%. Stefanowski, well, it's sort of the flip. Stefanowski statewide got 43% statewide, but he increased that in Wallingford to 49%, which is partial evidence. I mean, I guess you could say, well, you're picking and choosing your data, but not really. It's good to be a Republican in Wallingford, and if you're a Democrat running, you've got to understand, and this is really a question, I'm throwing it out to you, you've got to understand that Wallingford is a center-right town. True or false?
I think generally speaking, but if you look at Richard Blumenthal, he did much better than that in Wallingford. I'm sure statewide he was higher than what he was in Wallingford, and I'm sure Rosa statewide was higher than what she was in Wallingford, but they both still outperformed Governor Lamont, and I can't explain that. I would say that Lamont is more conservative than possibly Rosa DeLauro. So I don't understand how that happens. But when Rosa DeLauro walks down the street, we have Republicans in town who are falling all over themselves to go say hello to her. So, it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure. But yes, overall, I do think that Wallingford tends Republican, but we do have more registered Democrats in Wallingford than we do Republicans. I do think we have unaffiliated voters that sort of swing either way. And I think if they really understood what an extreme candidate Fishbein is, and we continue to hammer home that eventually we're going to erode. I hope it doesn't take 10 years and then he gets the chance to redistrict himself again. But yeah, I do think we can do it. It's going to take a while, longer than I had hoped.
This question I ask every couple of years to whoever happens to be on the show and sort of wearing a political hat. When it comes to the town council and the mayor, and they're two separate categories, and the same answer may not apply, to each category. When do voters start making up their mind as to who they're going to vote for in the next mayoral election or the next council election? Now I know it depends upon, hey, who's running. I get that, so you can't make up your mind, but Mayor Dickinson has been running all the time. People could certainly make up their mind about him. But just as a general proposition, when do you think voters start making up their mind about how they feel about candidates?
I think it depends on the voter. I think there are voters, Republican and Democrat, who always just vote down the line because they are Democrats and they are Republicans and they believe in what their line of candidates and who they are and oppose the other side. Then there's voters who I don't think make up their minds until the very last minute, that are still trying to balance, let's say, Roe v. Wade versus, the inflation that they're feeling and who they think is going to do a better job for them. So I think that there is always room in the last months to weeks to days before the campaign to swing things. I really do. It just depends on what's comes out and what happens and how good of a job you can get that information out there and quickly enough. So
yeah, I don't disagree. I'm just going to add just another angle to that. I think there's a category of voters. I'm going to call them the swing voters, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or unaffiliated. I think all of them can be swing voters in a certain situation. I think certainly in the mayoral election, these are swing voters now. These are not committed Democrats, not committed Republicans. I think they start making up their minds as soon as the last election is over. And in the case of the mayoral election in Wallingford, voters can begin to feel unsettled about the current administration the day after election day, depending upon what's happening, depending on what's in the news, depending on council votes, if they're following council votes, and so to get a swing voter to swing, let's say from Republican to Democrat, in the case of Mayor Dickinson and whoever the Democratic contender is, if they feel more and more gradually, incrementally, month by month, quarter by quarter, things are not going right because of what they read in the paper, because of what they see on TV when they watch the council meetings, that could swing them. Is it the critical mass to change an election? I think so, but I'm not sure. I can't prove it, with data. Yeah. And so if the Wallingford Democrats, and I would ask the same thing to the Republican chair also, if the Democrats want to swing things, this feeling about, I read a story and I'm really not happy with it, and the next story, I'm not happy with how things are going, it adds up. And I think by Labor Day, they've made their mind up.
I would posit it's also conversations with friends and neighbors, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's so even just employees in town, the more and more disgruntled people get with their treatment by the mayor and how frustrated they are over various issues, and the more conversations those people have in private with friends, family, neighbors, that is also a big factor for sure.
Yeah, let's switch over to the state election and see what we have to report on that. We've already talked about Lamont winning bigger across the state. During the campaign, were you ever worried that Governor Lamont was not going to win?
No,
Tell me why.
not a single day.
Not a single day.
Not a single day.
Tell
Not
me
a single
why.
day. I don't know. Intuition. I also wasn't worried about Mary Mashinsky.
Yeah.
Just I have a good sense that Mary has done a very good job and people really like her. I have a sense that Governor Lamont has been very sincere in his efforts and has worked very hard to hold the state together through the pandemic and actually did a good job despite, he's not who I would pick, but I have to tell you, even I was impressed with the job he did. And I still, as a constituent, want to hold him accountable and want to see him do more. But he did do begrudgingly a very good job through the pandemic. And I think the one voter ad that he did, where it was the person on the street saying, "How do you feel about Richard Governor Lamont?" You're like, "Oh, Ned's great." I think generally that's how people feel about Ned. I really do. That's my sense of I actually wanted to endorse Bedell as a Democrat to give him more of a boost, and the state party would not have it. They were
You mentioned a name that most voters are not familiar with, so I want you to just explain who that person is.
the Green Party candidate who
Okay.
ran against Ciccarella. I was interested in having all the Democratic, endorse him for to put him on the Democrat line as well as the Green Party line. I don't know that he would have won, but it would have been, at least we had a candidate that was on the line and somebody serious who is running. And he has a lot of good platforms that I absolutely agree with and that most of our membership agrees with. But he was a serious Green Party candidate, and he didn't want to be a Democrat. So that, that's obviously his prerogative and his choice, and I support that choice. But for the situation, the state party wasn't terribly happy, especially with Rosa having a Green Party challenger and the governor having a Green Party challenger. I wasn't worried that our endorsement of Bedell was going to in any way endanger Rosa or the governor, but there was some nervousness, 6 months ago that might be the case. But
Yeah.
I didn't
If it was
hear that.
if it was up to me, Bedell would not have been a Democrat. However,
Well, at least endorsed, right? Same way
endorsed.
that
Yeah.
Mary Mashinsky is endorsed by the Working Family Party, and Stefanowski is endorsed. Oh, not sorry, he wasn't endorsed by the Independent Party, but the same way that cross endorsements happening
You almost
happened.
was.
I was, if the Green Party can endorse Mary, why can't we endorse Bedell? Right?
So,
That should be a normal thing. But
so in the interest of sort of informing the viewers, in case they didn't have a chance to read up on it, this is how the Hartford Courant sort of reported the summary of the election according to the Hartford Courant. Bear with me, I got 6 or 7 sentences, but
go ahead.
it sort of, it brings it to a head. The Republican candidates for governor and U.S. Senate, Bob Stefanowski and Leora Levy, both lost by double-digit margins after telling their supporters for months that their own internal data showed the races to be much closer. In the end, the public polls were correct as Governor Ned Lamont and U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal roared to victory, kind of an editorial use of the word roared. Among the surprises on election night was the extent of the Democratic victories in once Republican Fairfield County, especially Greenwich, Darien, and New Canaan. Lamont won all 3 of those communities, which would have been unthinkable for a Democratic candidate for governor during the 1980s and the 1990s. In a further flipping of Connecticut's electoral map, while Republican-dominated Fairfield County has now turned Democratic, once Democratic Eastern Connecticut has now turned Republican in many towns. Just a couple more to go. Despite spending 4 times as much money as he did in 2018, Stefanowski lost by a much wider margin this year in his rematch against Lamont. Stefanowski spent about $2.9 million and lost by 3 percentage points 4 years ago. But this year he spent 13 million and lost by 13 percentage points.
Well, can I respond to that real
Yeah,
quick?
yeah, absolutely.
What comes to mind when you say all of that is that the fear of losing rights, like abortion rights, the fear of having extremists, trying to overturn elections based on whim, overrode in those communities the inflation pressures, right? And where inflation pressures were stronger, we're seeing more of the Republican lean, would be my observation to those comments.
I think that's right. I think that's right. So the Connecticut Mirror summarized it this way: Democrats had a record to run on, and Lamont had a clear story to tell about what Connecticut has done.
Mhm.
That story included not only a $650 million tax relief plan, but more importantly, a stunning reversal to the deficits that plagued state finances for nearly a decade prior to 2018. The chief accomplishment might be a record-setting 3.3 billion rainy day fund and another 1.4 billion in federal pandemic relief still available to support state finances in the next two-year budget. By contrast, Republican gubernatorial candidate Bob Stefanowski shifted themes for much of his campaign, and GOP legislative candidates weren't always in lockstep with him. The GOP's legislators' response to the Democrats' $650 million tax relief package was a proposal worth 1.2 billion, but Stefanowski put 2 billion on the table. Some Republican lawmakers weren't ready to back that much in tax cuts, with threats of a recession growing. Yeah. Stefanowski also referred to the rainy day fund as a slush fund, while other Republicans were taking some pride in that because it was a bipartisan effort to change the budget rules to create that reserve. So he had not just a messaging problem, there was a policy substance problem.
Agreed.
Stefanowski also made overtures to social conservatives and vaccine skeptics that didn't draw applause from all Republican circles. So it seemed like he wanted to have his foot in two circles, sort of the moderate circle, but the conservative circle at the same time. It didn't fly. He lost.
I would also say that he also just wouldn't pay attention to the evidence, right? He's trying to paint Connecticut as this crime-ridden, horrible place, and the statistics that came out about crime just didn't support what he was saying, and he was just ignoring that. That kind of hurts his credibility in a voter who is looking at all of these election deniers and then seeing him deny evidence. It doesn't jive so well. It makes him look as the extremist that he may not be. And plus, what he does, he loan shark, is how he made his money. Like, he's just, I don't see him as a friend of the people.
Now Alida.
Right? Or what was his business? It was loan shark, right?
It was a paycheck loan.
Right. I mean, I'm sure that helps people short term, but the long term impact for working people is that can really destroy your finances.
So I want to pivot.
There's other solutions than that. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to pivot to the national scene, and the challenge here is to be brief, and it's very hard to do because there's so much coming out now, so much good writing as to why the Democrats did so much better than most people thought, and a lot of that has to do with individual states and individual issues in those states, like was abortion on the ballot literally as some legislation or a constitutional amendment. A lot of variables, but we're going to try to address it. But I want to start with referring to maybe the most prestigious political publication in the country today, Teen Vogue. Yes, Teen Vogue. And I got to Teen Vogue.
What does Teen Vogue have to say?
This is critical.
I missed the article. Apologies.
This is critical. So Teen Vogue conducted a poll, and I was Googling polling, to try to figure out what was going on. Mm-hmm. And They had a poll that was done before the election, which intrigued me. It wasn't an exit poll. And I wanted to see what they were, publishing to their viewers, distributing to their readers, I mean. And so they said that they surveyed 1,173 young voters. And this is what they found. I'm going to get to the punchline in a minute.
Okay.
It's welcome to the second installment of the Teen Vogue and Change Research Midterms Vibe Check. Very, very today language. With early voting underway in many states and election day just weeks away, we surveyed 1,173 registered voters under the age of 35 to get their thoughts on the direction of the country. Hey, look, this is the most important thing. There was little interest in dating across the aisle. Very serious problem. Partisanship isn't playing out only in elections, it's a part of our dating lives too. Remember, this is teen vogue, okay? Democratic women are less likely to cross the aisle for a dating prospect than Republican men are. 84% of Democratic women considered a deal breaker to say all lives matter, while 71% of Republican men consider it a deal breaker to say Black lives matter. What does this augur for the future? I don't know. We can talk about that. 70% of Democratic women say being a conservative is a deal breaker. 64% of conservative men saying that being a liberal is a deal breaker. A stunning 84% of Democratic women say it's a deal breaker to be anti-choice. Only 42% of Republican men say that pro-choice is a deal breaker. Religion also plays plays into matters of the heart, with half of Democratic women saying that being a devout Christian is a deal breaker, and 44% of Republican men say being an atheist is a deal breaker. Among the surveyed voters, the number one red flag when considering a partner is whether that person identifies as a MAGA Republican, with 63% of voters saying that is a definite no, so on and so forth. I'm going to come back to Teen Vogue. But what does that say for the marriage rate? Yeah. 5, 10 years down the line. What does that say for the birth rate 5, 10 years down there? And we can edit this question out if we want to.
Well, I find it interesting. Is there any historic data to that? Like how has that trended historically? Like in the 1950s, was being one or the other a deal breaker in dating prospects or not? Or did people care less about that? I don't know. I don't know what that means for, so that's a hard thing to see. Yeah.
Not subscribing to Teen Vogue. I didn't look at the document.
So you didn't do your research.
So I'm done. But just to continue on with them, our new poll conducted between October 5 and October 11 found that recent Democratic achievements are popular on paper with young voters, but many of them remain unaware of the legislation. This is sort of a message to the chair of the Democratic Town Committee.
Yeah. Well, and to the state party, frankly.
And the state party and really all across the country.
We need better messaging from our state party. I think rather than, I had Sarah Locke is now the executive director, and I'd actually wanted that job. And part of what I think the state party could do to support even somebody like Rebecca Hyland better and Mary Mashinsky better and Liz Linehan better is to talk about what they achieved in the last legislative session, and also talk about what our vision is generally, not just that candidate, but generally what Democrats want to achieve in the next 2 years, and helping people understand what a vote for a Democrat generally is, and the kinds of candidates that we are seeking to put up there and out there to achieve these kinds of things. Rather than making it just about the candidate generally, but that we are a team working towards certain goals.
Yeah, so it gets into that a little bit, and it says fewer than 30% of surveyed voters have heard of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first significant federal gun reform legislation in nearly 3 decades.
Yeah.
But when it was explained to them in sort of a semi-push poll, what that act was, is yeah, we like that. but they didn't know.
They don't know about it, right?
Barely half heard about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is
Right.
best known for its provisions to reduce U.S. carbon emissions.
Yep. And
And only 23% have heard a lot about that. Just weeks before the election, almost half said they've seen, read, or heard only a little or nothing at all about candidates for Congress. There are two significant outliers to this awareness gap. Most young voters have heard about the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, 97%. And the Biden administration forgiving $10,000 in federal student loan debt, 89% heard about that.
That's pretty good.
Biden debt relief has made 40% of respondents either much or somewhat more supportive of Biden and Democrats, and 4 in 10 voters deem it a significant step forward. I'm going to skim here now. Abortion remained a central issue in the midterms for women in that age group. Turning the page. Young voters have a sense of what Republicans would do with a majority, and it's not what they want. We get into climate change, we get into abortion, we get into some tax policy, and then to the dating across the aisle thing.
So
There
like
you go.
Jahana Hayes, like I think what hurt her opponent was the senior center. I read an article that he had, I don't remember if it was the New York Times or it was a local paper, but that he'd gone to a senior center to talk to the seniors there. And the big question was about Social Security. And sure, he might support Social Security, but would he be the state rep that would, or the state senator that would vote against his party when his party votes to repeal Social Security?
Yeah.
And I don't think he would be. And I think a lot of voters realize that. And that's why he couldn't get over on Jahana Hayes. I think that's where he lost.
Yeah. So I got a fistful of stuff, but it's a good thing I run out of time. I can't get into it. It could be rather dense, but I'm going to sort of put my own conclusion to everything I've read. Then I'm going to turn to you and
Sure.
and do the same. To explain why the Democrats did so well this midterm election, I guess we can generalize in a couple of things, and that is the Republicans in various states that put up a lot of fringe candidates. Mitch McConnell very diplomatically said quality of the candidate, but what he was talking about were loony candidates that had loony proposals that were just not credible. And swing voters in these states the Democrats won were tired of the theater, the drama, the craziness, the election denial. They're just tired of all that. And to the extent that the Republicans put up candidates that represented election denial, dismissed the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, said no, we're moving on. Abortion was a huge issue. More so than I think most pollsters thought. Inflation was a problem for Democrats, but it was balanced out, or more than balanced out, probably sensing this. I have no data to back this up. Probably sensing that inflation is temporary. A woman losing her right to control her body is permanent. Losing your right to elect a public official without having someone raid the Capitol to try to steal that from you is permanent. Inflation is temporary. So I think they sort of got the picture. And as one of the commentators said, the normal type candidates, Republican or Democrat, did well, and the extremists did not do well. And that's why Republicans across the country are asking or hoping Donald Trump doesn't declare his candidacy, doesn't go to Georgia, just backs out and have a normal Republican candidate president, which would give Joe Biden a harder time. Your thoughts, and it's going to be the final thoughts.
So we've got two sides here, right? And I think, on the one side, I thought the Democrats with I don't know, there was bipartisan to some extent, the January 6th commission and all the weight of the January 6th commission and all of that drumbeat going on, the abortion, loss of Social Security, then also the Democrats delivering on the child tax credit. as well as making efforts to deliver on gun violence. At least in Connecticut, we were able to. Nationally, that's been a lot harder, but we've been trying to deliver on gun violence. And then the Republicans have the economy, inflation, basically, and crime. And I just think that it was weightier for the Democrats than it was for the Republicans. So in a year where typically things flip just because things flip, we were able to counter that red wave because of all these really heavy issues that were on the table that weren't able to overcome the fluff of this inflation and this crime. Not that those aren't serious things, but like you said, inflation is temporary, and crime, when you're talking about gun violence, we have a huge epidemic of gun violence in this country, and we've got to address that. That's also partly about the crime. If we're screaming about crime, well, what are you doing about it, Republicans? Aside from throwing people in jail, you refuse to have any kind of sensible gun legislation. So,
yeah, maybe some of the most significant news. I said I give you the last word, but I'm taking it from you. Maybe the best news is this little piece that appeared in the Record Journal a few days ago. Sharp attacks on Trump from Murdoch's news outlets. Fox News has an incredible grip on its viewership. And I think one of the obstacles to moving forward is the extent to which Fox News may keep us back in the Trump era and Trumpism. But this is what that little piece said. Right. Former President Donald Trump has taken some hits in the aftermath of the midterm elections, perhaps none as hard as those from outlets controlled by news magnate Rupert Murdoch. Mm-hmm. The New York Post depicted Trump as Humpty Dumpty on its cover Thursday and ran a column that suggested Trump was the most profound vote repellent in modern American history. The Wall Street Journal ran an editorial saying that Trump was the Republican Party's biggest loser. This is Republican sources.
Right.
Trump's former press secretary suggested on Fox News that he hold off announcing a presidential candidacy. Trump dismissed that as fake news, and any characterization of him as a loser was fake news. So there we go.
Last word.
Well, I'm going to give that back to you.
All right. I've got a good one.
It is, and it's a surprise because I didn't tell you I was going to ask it, but you've been asking yourself this, I'm sure.
Okay.
Mayoral election 2023, you got 2 declared candidates. That's no surprise. How is that going to work out? You got Vinnie Testa wanting to be mayor, Riley O'Connell wanting to be mayor. They're both campaigning in their own way. What's going to happen?
Well, first, I just want to address the last thing you said, which I would say the emperor has no clothes. You know that story? Right. That's what I think has happened, is that the blinders are sort of off. People are realizing that pretending that all this stuff is happening doesn't mean that it's actually happening. And we've got to get back to reality. And Trump is actually this ugly thing that he really is. Yeah. But as far as what we are going to do as a DTC, well, the hope is that we have within our DTC that we can nominate a candidate, and that everybody will be respectful of that process, and that we won't have a primary, that we'll be able to focus the campaign very quickly on winning mayor in Wallingford. That's the hope. So far, I've been had conversations with each candidate that I think that could be a possibility. I need to confirm that. Things could have changed. It's been an election cycle, and I haven't picked that up yet, but we are most definitely picking up that this month and having conversations amongst the leadership of the DTC on what we want to see there. We're hoping that it can be a respectful process, and that everybody will feel heard, and then we'll be able to focus on what we need to after that.
Let's make that the final word. I appreciate you coming on the Citizen Mike show again. This is, I think, your second appearance.
It is. I appreciate it. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Well, it's always fun. So
good. I enjoy it.
So thanks again, and thanks to you viewers for watching the Citizen Mike show. We really do appreciate it. And with thanks to WPAA, which puts the show up on its programming schedule. Weeknights usually are always at 9 p.m. And so, as we used to say, during the WPAA days, if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike. Good night, everybody. Good night, Alida. Thanks again.
Thank you again. Take care. Bye-bye.